Um, my name's Catherine Coster. I'm the Communications Director for SWOP-USA, and I'm joined today by Maggie Mayhem, a SWOP-USA board member, and she's going to give a really fantastic overview presentation of outreach to sex workers. I'm so excited about this presentation, especially because Maggie Mayhem has a ton of experience with both outreach as well as sex work. She began volunteering as an HIV test counselor at a free and anonymous clinic in 2003. She spent many wonderful years with that program before she became the clinic coordinator. She moved to the Bay Area in 2008, and she was hired as the HIV senior specialist at Larkin Street Youth Services Center in San Francisco, where she got a lot of experience in street-based outreach skills. In addition to supporting her local needle exchange, she's the founder of harmredux.com, a small project that distributes health and harm reduction supplies. And she's also spoken a lot around the world about sex worker rights. So I'm really excited to have her be doing this webinar presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the conversation panel on the, I guess, right side of this webinar. And I'll make sure those questions get answered during the webinar if they're not going to be covered on the next slide or the next two slides, or Maggie and I will both get to answering questions at the end of the webinar. So anyways, let's go to you. Maggie, are you ready?
I'm all ready.
Wonderful.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Maggie, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk a little bit about doing outreach to sex workers. It's something that I've loved doing for a long time, and it's something that I'm still learning how to do and developing more partners and developing my skills. So I'm happy to share a little bit about what I know. And I want to start this by saying I come from a very strong harm reduction perspective on how to work. And there's a lot of people who have a lot of things to say about harm reduction. There's books that have been written about it. There are courses in universities. But I have a very, very simple definition of harm reduction. And that is any positive change. Any positive change. And it's when you let go of an agenda and you provide people with an array of tools and services that might be helpful for them. And you don't make any determination about which tool will be the right one for them to use. You just open their field up and you let them make decisions that fit best in their own life. And this philosophy has governed all the work that I've done. And it's definitely something that's always near and dear to my heart whenever I'm doing outreach. But what is outreach? Outreach is a lot of different things. You might hear about a brand or a celebrity who does a brand promotion with a street outreach team. That's definitely one way. There are a lot of ministries that do a lot of outreach, whether that's knocking on doors to share the good word, or having events in the community. But we're going to be focusing on the act of providing goods or services or information to people who might be unable to access them. And you do so by meeting people exactly where they are. And that's either where they are in their lives or where they are just physically located. There's three major objectives whenever you are engaging with outreach. You definitely want to be able to engage with people. That's the whole point, is you want to develop relationships, you want to get to know your community. So you want to meet people, you want to listen to what they have to say about their life as they're experiencing it. And you want to develop trust, rapport. Those are really key things. So this happens kind of over the whole long haul of every outreach session or mission that you do. It's a direct provision of services. You're going to find out what people want, what people need, and you directly deliver it to them. You don't make them come to you, you go to them. And it's also about partnerships, and it's about networking in your community, not just with the people that you're meeting on outreach, but also other people who might have resources to share or important ideas. It's definitely a collaborative process. None of us can do this on our own. Another thing to say is that sex workers are and have been leading outreach for a very, very, very long time. This is not something new. This is not something that anyone has invented recently. It's something that's been ongoing for as long as there has been sex work. There have been sex workers that have been reaching out to their community to help connect them to the things that they want or need in their lives. So this is not new, but a lot of people are going to act like it's new. A lot of the organizations that do outreach are not actually peer-based organizations. They come from broader social services or public health. A lot might be faith-based organizations. And in general, they have kind of a hierarchy where they are the people who give goods to the victims or people who are marginalized around the edges of society, but they aren't actually peers. In this case, we're talking about peer-to-peer support and breaking into a new model of outreach that really focuses on those types of connections. And why do we do it? Well, for one is that we want to build trust and relationships in our community, and we want to create change in what the norms of experience are. We want to directly deliver services to people who might not otherwise have access to them, or direct delivery of services if the people who might be providing them are potentially hostile or have an agenda or a way of engaging that kind of keeps stigma around or are unfriendly. If someone who's providing services isn't able to actually respect the people that they're giving those services to, that's not going to work. That's going to be a failed mission, and sometimes you might have to duplicate service if the service provider isn't really having the kind of attitude that's helpful to anybody. It's also about advocacy and documentation. How do we know what's going on in our communities if we aren't actually talking to people and finding out firsthand? If you're not talking to people, then you're making assumptions based on what they need. You need to really reach out and find out for yourself what's happening. It's also about changing this public narrative of sex workers solely as victims. This is not the case. As we go back to that slide, sex workers have been supporting sex workers as long as this profession has existed. But sometimes people forget that. So it's about going back and letting them know that. It's also about upsetting the social welfare hierarchy and a lot of their stated goals or intentions. Oftentimes, outreach to sex workers is done with the stated goal of getting people out of sex work. That's not necessarily what we're about. We're about finding people, getting to know them, and helping connect them to goods, resources, or services that they need. Outreach is also a way to identify what kinds of threats or dangers are present in the community, talking to one another, finding out what issues aren't being heard. Are there people like clients who are potentially causing trouble? Are there law enforcement officers who are causing trouble? You need to talk, you need to find out about that. And when we know about what those threats are, we can begin to engage with them and hopefully mitigate them. It also gives us a chance to establish partnerships and community ties. It lets people know that we are here, that we are current and former sex workers who are very aware of a lot of the nuances of need. And we can partner with other people and get to know them as well and have them trust us as parts of the community. Another big reason that's not on this list is it also helps us access a lot of the funding that has been going to trafficking. There's more and more and more money that's being put aside, and a lot of that money is going towards people who have a very clear agenda that we might not share. And I think that we have every right to access those types of funding streams and to keep them within our community without having any kind of desire to tell people what to do with their lives, but instead to support them. So that's another really, really key thing that I think is important. So what do you have to do to be an effective outreach worker? A lot of people feel really intimidated when they consider going out and doing outreach. It seems like a very big professional thing. There might be questions about what kind of training is out there. But the fact is, even at the most well-funded organizations, the most mainstream organizations, the biggest ones you can name, the people that are generally hired as outreach workers oftentimes have the least amount of experience, the least amount of training, but the most enthusiasm for the mission and the purpose of going out and doing outreach. So if you're sitting there and thinking, I don't have any type of a background in social work or in public health, what do I have to offer? And the answer is you have a lot, and you actually are probably equally qualified as the person who works for a big organization. It's just a matter of connecting with your community, getting support from people, and taking those steps to get out into the community. So there's nothing that any other outreach worker has that you might not. And in fact, you have another asset, which is that you are a peer. What are some of the qualities that a great outreach worker has? Well, for one, outreach workers are very enthusiastic and friendly communicators. They're not people who are loaded with judgment or stigma. They're very empathetic. They're listening ears. They're not attempting to be a therapist. They're just striving to be present and to be really aware of what's happening. They also have a shared characteristic to offer. This might be similar life experiences. It might be sharing demographic identifiers such as race or ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation. You have to have something in common and a reason to have a common struggle. That's a great characteristic. A lot of passion. If you're going out into the field doing outreach and you aren't actually able to get excited about doing it and you look kind of dour and mean and like you're having a bad time, that's not the kind of energy that anyone really likes to meet. They definitely want to be able to see someone who's got a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of good energy. Communication is also important. You have to have really good listening skills. In fact, that's probably most of any outreach mission is listening to people. But when you provide information, you want to be clear, you want to be concise, and you want to make sure that it can be understood. When you're doing street-based outreach, you're going out into people's homes and workplaces. And most of us don't have time to deal with someone else who wants to talk to us. We want something to be simple and relevant to our lives. So working on that, getting a quick elevator pitch is always a great quality. And being flexible. When you're doing outreach out in the community, you really don't know what you might be facing. If you get rain, you're going to have to adapt to rain. And you might have to make the decision to go in or stay out. If people are seeming kind of hostile, you're going to have to make a decision. Is there something happening in this environment that we aren't aware of, or is this a bad day? You have to be really, really flexible. You can't come out with a rigid schedule. Outreach will never work well with that. So you have to go with the flow. And what kind of outreach are there? These are some big terms that are tossed around. Domiciliary outreach is when you go knocking on doors to meet someone. This is one form of outreach that I think we've all probably encountered, especially during an election season. This is when someone knocks on your door and they want to tell you about a politician, or they would like to share their faith with you. And sometimes this can be really effective, sometimes not. But this is probably not the form of outreach that we're talking about in terms of sex worker outreach, although it might be. Detached outreach is when you go outside and you're hoping to connect with certain individuals. And that's different from a peripatetic outreach is when you're looking for groups. And the only reason this might be relevant is if you were going out on an outreach mission and you were really looking for someone who might benefit from, let's say, PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis. It's a type of medication that someone can take to prevent HIV before an infection has taken place. And you went out, you'd be hoping to meet someone who has a particular set of risk factors, maybe lives in a certain area where they could access that, but you have a very individual profile of the kind of person that you want to meet. And so you might talk to a lot of people and do a little bit of screening and then see if you found the right person. Peripatetic outreach is when you're looking for groups of people or organizations. And this is probably the biggest type of outreach that we do when we do sex worker outreach, because you're looking for an area in your community where there is a big cluster of sex workers who are working. It can be really hard. If you just went out to the club and you tried to screen people to find out who is a sex worker, you might talk to 1,000 people and no one's going to share that information with you, or you're in the wrong place in the wrong time. Instead, you want to find out where are a lot of people gathering already. How can you find a density of people? But those are really big terms. I think it's actually more important to break outreach down into two different models: traditional outreach and peer-based outreach. Traditional outreach is kind of part of that hierarchy that I was talking about earlier on, where there's a really strong drive to change someone's individual decisions. This would be the type of outreach that organizations do with the type of expectation that at the end of services, someone will make the decision to no longer engage in sex work. Peer-based outreach is really about changing the norms that are experienced by a group of people. So rather than telling any individual to give up sex work, it's about changing what sex work might look like for them in that community. Traditional outreach definitely has limited access to a whole group because it's very individual focused. Whereas peer-based outreach really relies on social diffusion or word of mouth. There's a lot of trust that goes on. It's about getting word out to a group of people who have a common characteristic. And I think it's really, really important to look for community change and to change what someone might expect from their experience as a sex worker, which might be a lack of respect or a lot of danger or a lack of resources. We really recognize that we're all making decisions in response to the context of our own lives, and they're not random decisions. They're not arbitrary decisions. We're making decisions the best that we can with what we have and where we are. And I think it's more important to try to shift where we are in a given situation rather than what any given individual is choosing to survive in that context. So I'm not asking anyone to do anything. I don't have an agenda. Instead, I want to see the overall circumstances of sex work change. But one thing that they all have in common is a limited role. An outreach worker is not going to be able to change the world overnight. These are really small encounters. Oftentimes you have really stark limitations on what you can offer. You can't necessarily give someone $1 million. You can't necessarily get full access to healthcare. You have a few community resources you can offer. You have what's in your bag, but you might not be able to make major change. Really, it's about developing relationships and better identifying what people need or want. And also making sure that the interventions that you're offering are what people do actually want. If you're continually offering interventions that no one is taking and no one wants, that's not necessarily going to be effective. And what are some different forms of outreach? And this is where I also want to say that outreach is a really, really, really broad concept. Even though a lot of people get very focused on street-based outreach, which is obviously the first one on the list, where you go out into a community and you offer people things like condoms or lube or harm reduction supplies, there's others. Getting together with people and writing letters or postcards to people who might be incarcerated, to politicians or community leaders, or community leaders, that is a form of outreach. You get together with your organization or your peers, and you all reach out to other people together. Attending city council or neighborhood meetings might be a form of outreach, even if you don't say anything. If you are, going to a city council meeting once a month and you're just listening and you're getting to know who those leaders are and they get to see your face and they know your name, when they have issues that affect sex workers, they might look to you for a comment or for some guidance on it. So that's another great way of doing outreach. Attending actions in solidarity or support of a lot of common issues. We don't lead single issue lives. This is not a single issue movement. We are definitely working alongside anti-racist endeavors. We're in support of transgender workers. We're looking at poverty. We're looking at homelessness. We're looking at gentrification. And a lot of us are already involved in things like this. We're already there. We're already doing it. But going out and putting out a hand and saying, my name is Maggie, I'm with SWOP-USA, and I really support that you're working today, and I know that my colleagues do as well. We just wanted to let you know that we were here and we support you, and we would like to know what we can do to support you. So you don't necessarily go in and try to co-opt what they're doing. You act in support and solidarity with them. And community interface is another great form of outreach. There have been a lot of communities that have been doing things like encouraging people to report license plate numbers to the police in areas that have a lot of traffic for street-based sex work. It might make a really big difference in people's lives if you go out into that very same community and you offer counter information, different ways to talk to sex workers, to let them know that if they have concerns, they can know people, that they can politely say that maybe the noise level is a little bit too high. Or politely asking people to move down a couple blocks. Those can be really, really important ways to connect with people. And they all have varying levels of experience or supplies or funding that are necessary. It might cost a lot of money to do some street-based outreach, to buy supplies and go out regularly. It might not cost as much money to get together and write postcards, or to get together with people and go to a city council meeting once a month, or to a neighborhood meeting. So there's all kinds of thresholds here based on where you are. And a lot of times you want to find something that you feel really passionate about. If you don't know very much about needle exchange, it might not be the best idea to try to go out with different types of syringes and works, because you don't have the same familiarity or passion for that goal. But if you have a lot of passion for getting together to write really supportive, enthusiastic letters to people, or to be a political watchdog, that's a great option. And all of these are moving towards our common goals. So how do you start your own outreach project? This is a big question that a lot of people have. It's a great project. It's very overwhelming at times, but you break it down into small steps. And there are so many wonderful outreach projects that you can always look to who are going to give you great information. SWOP Sacramento does a lot. Portland has Stroll. There's the St. James Infirmary. There's HIPS. There's even more than I can name here right now. So whenever you have a question, find someone that you know is local, and you can always start there first. But here are some things that you can also think about when you're in the early planning stages of doing outreach. You really want to start out with some strategizing. You want to get together with your organization. A lot of the outreach projects that fail to launch, they don't have any clear stated goals. They don't know what they're going out into the community to do. They're kind of just feeling around for it. It's a really good idea to get together with people and decide, what are your goals? What are you going to strive towards? You want to look for support in your community. If you're in a place that's very, very antagonistic and people don't want to see you out in the community, that can be difficult. So you want to make sure that you have people who are going to support what you're doing. You want to make sure that you have enough people. If you lack capacity, if you're just 1 or 2 people, starting a major outreach project might be really difficult, because you need a good core group of people to share the responsibilities with. Funding can definitely be a major issue. It can be hard to access funding, and if everyone is kind of pulling out of their own pocket, it can add to resentment. It's not sustainable. You really want to make sure that you can budget for it and that you have enough funds to do what you'd like to do. Some external factors would be overly burdensome hurdles. There have been a lot of times where communities are so antagonistic towards certain kinds of outreach that they will begin to target outreach workers. And if you're going out into the community and you find that you're being stopped or you're being bothered by a lot of people and it's becoming a risk, it's not necessarily something that you need to go out and do. It's martyrdom isn't really going to help with that. It might mean finding a different project, or realizing that those hurdles in and of themselves are the project to face. And having difficulty working in partnerships. You have to be willing to negotiate with other people and find out what they have to offer and what they lack and where you fit in with that. But instead of it's not just about the outreach you're doing with the people that you're meeting. It's also about the relationships that you build along the way with other people who share resources. After you've done some strategizing, you want to identify some more things in specific with what your group has. How big and committed is your group? Do you have some people who have been really solid that you know you can depend on, who are showing up regularly? Or do you have people who kind of come in and out of your group and don't necessarily stay for very long? What sources of funding do you have? And what sources of funding might you have? There's certainly different funding options with SWOP-USA. There's also funding fundraisers that you can do in your own community. There might be some other community organizations who might be willing to offer you some funding. A lot of my startup funding for the project I did came from clients. I pestered them, and they were my source of funding. Who in your community might be an ally that's worth approaching? A lot of the needle exchanges or syringe access sites are very friendly and approachable, and they might be a great ally if you're looking to start up doing outreach. They might even be able to offer some specific training that you need. They might have resources. They might have a bunch of supplies that you can hand out on their behalf as a satellite program. So it really is worth getting out into your community and getting to know who really would support the outreach that you're doing. Do you have time in your life to regularly conduct outreach? Outreach isn't something that works very well if you do it every now and again or once in a blue moon. You want to be really consistent, and you want to look at your schedule and say, do I have 6 months to a year to make a presence in my community? Or are you really, really busy right now, and this isn't something that's a good time to start? What obstacles do you foresee getting in your way? How dangerous is any given area? What is the community doing? These are all going to be so highly specific to where you are and what you have, that you need to be really honest and talk with people and figure out, what can you anticipate being a problem? And what needs do you anticipate for your outreach? Do a brainstorm of what you think or what you speculate will be needed in your community. And write that down, because you might find out in the course of outreach that it's different. Survey your target area. You're definitely going to want to do a lot of reconnaissance work. You're going to want to go out into the community, and before you start doing any outreach, you just watch it. You just look. You get to know what its rhythms are like. What is it like in the daytime? What is it like in the nighttime? What people do you see there? Do you see any organizations coming through? Are there no organizations? How much police presence in there is there? Just get to know it. Write down, do a log, and get to know where you're going. It's really hard to do any type of outreach if you don't know where you're going really well. And this will also help you revise where you might want to conduct outreach. The other thing is you want to survey the people that you are proposing doing outreach to. That's actually probably should be the #1 thing. Once you've gotten to know a little bit of an area and you think it's a good candidate of a place to go, before you even begin doing outreach, start talking to people and see if they would welcome your presence there, or if they would prefer that you stay away. Find out what they want and how does that stack up with what you anticipated they might want. What do they think about the best local practices? Do they think you should be coming at night or in the daytime? What information does that group of people have to offer you? And you really want to go by them. They're some of the best guides that you can ever possibly meet when you're doing outreach. Listen to them, follow their lead, meet them where they are. And again, consider any potential partners. Maybe there isn't an organization that's out there doing resource distribution, but maybe there might be a location. There might be a friendly church that has a basement where you can meet or store supplies. This is where you just look at who might be willing to work with you, who has something that you think might be helpful, that might not necessarily be quite as obvious. If there are outreach workers that are out there, what are they wearing and who do they represent? And then you want to go back to your original strategizing and see what you were right on about and what you might have been a little bit off about, and already start to modify what you were doing. You also want to establish a protocol, and I'm sorry that this slide is a little bit wonky. A protocol is a great way for you to pass on your practices to the rest of your organization and to have a very clear standard so that everyone knows what's going on. And one of the key things is establishing a regular schedule. If you go to city council meetings, decide to pick a date, do that the first week of the month or the last week of the month, and be really consistent with that. If you're doing outreach, pick a night or a day and return at that time, so that people can expect you to be there and get to know that they can depend on you. If you meet people, follow up with them. If you shake a hand with somebody, send them an email a week later that says that you enjoyed meeting them, remind them who you are, and remind them what you do in the community. Those things really, really matter. We lose business cards all the time. Follow up. Look like a posse. This is something that I found is really helpful. It helps people get to know you in the community. So if you always have something that your group always wears, whether that's a t-shirt, whether that's an outreach bag or a patch, look like you're a crew that's together, and that will really help people recognize you on the street, and it will allow word of mouth to work on your behalf. If you guys all have green backpacks and you're always out on a Tuesday night, people will spread the word, and on Tuesday night, people will come looking for your green backpacks. So look like a posse. Make sure that you have a protocol for how big your group will be when you go out. I would say never, ever, ever go out by yourself. Always make sure you have at least one buddy. If you have a big group, it's great to go to the same area and maybe break off into pairs and then meet up again together so you're not so big and overwhelming. But at the very least, you always want to go out in pairs. Check in and check out with somebody. Let people know that you've gone out on outreach and let them know that you've returned back in. And then document that. Document the contacts that you made. Document when you went out and when you came back. Refilling all your supplies. One thing that can definitely drag down an outreach project is if people bring back empty outreach bags. That's one that can be really discouraging because you showed up on your Tuesday night and you looked in that green backpack and the people who went out last time didn't refill it and you have an empty bag. That definitely is a big thing. And write up a summary of what you saw that night and what was going on. How did you feel? How did your team feel? And keep that in a running log so that people can learn and build off of your experiences and get to know an area and find any patterns that are happening. When you start doing outreach, you want to evaluate how you're doing and how the project is doing. So it's always helpful to do that, once a quarter or once a year. Take a look at how your project is going. Have you been showing up regularly at the same spot? Do people know that they're going to meet you there? Or has it been kind of haphazard? Are you actually meeting people? If you've been going out for 6 months and you haven't met a single person, it might be time to reevaluate what your process is. When you do make contact with people, are they happy to see you or do they turn and run in the other direction? That's also another good thing to evaluate. Are there any gaps in your services that should be filled? How are your expectations being met or exceeded? Think about that too. How's your funding doing? Do you have enough? Are you getting more funding? Is there anything that you can drop that's just weighing you down? Or is there anything that you need to add? And again, what challenges have you been facing? For a little bit of some Street Outreach 101, this is some more specifics, and I hope this will also spur more questions from people, and I am looking forward to taking a lot of questions. But this is where I get more specific as to what to do if you're actually doing street-based outreach and not just necessarily doing some of the other forms. Because again, those other protocol work, no matter what you're doing. If you guys are doing letter writing, you want to go through that same process of strategizing, identifying, evaluating to make sure that your project is going well. And you want to document that just as much as anything else. You want to be able to say in 1 month we wrote, 100 postcards, or we attended 3 political meetings and we met 15 people there. Quantifying what you do is a really important way to lend credibility to your project, to set yourself up for funding, and to establish trust in the community. But if you're doing street-based outreach, the first thing we need to talk about is safety. And if you don't feel safe, leave the area. Wearing matching t-shirts or having business cards or brightly colored outreach bags to identify yourselves is going to help you be seen by the people that you want to be seen by. And it's also a great way to handle law enforcement if they're wondering who you are, or for neighbors if they're wondering who you are. When you go out and people can clearly identify you as an outreach worker, that can mean a lot of safety in a lot of different ways. It might mean people are less likely to try to bother you, or if you're worried about losing your stuff, you're pretty clearly indicated as not having things of tremendous value on your person. Always go out in pairs, check in and check out. And when you go out in pairs, one person should always be dedicated to making sure that they're watching the environment, and the other person should be watching the person or the people that you're talking to and handing out supplies. So it's not helpful if you have 2 people and one person is checking their phone and the other person is having a conversation with somebody. That's not going to be as safe as one person who's still going to keep scanning the environment and knowing what's going on. So always do have that buddy system. Talk beforehand and decide who's going to be doing engagement and who's going to be watching the scene. Talk to different organizations in the area that provide outreach about what the safety has been like. any problems that they've seen. Really, that's part of the partnership. Find out what they have to know already and keep talking to them. Even if you aren't working closely together, if they're having problems, that's a good thing to know about in advance. Always scan your surroundings. Look for things that seem out of place. Look for patterns. Look for if anyone has given you bad date information, keep your eye out for that. And we're going to talk on the next slide a little bit about some people you might want to keep your eyes on. Don't carry anything illegal on your person. When you're doing outreach, you probably don't want to have any drugs or alcohol or illegal weapons. You want to have basically as little as possible and the resources that you're handing out, because you don't know, you might be stopped by police and you wouldn't want your project or your life compromised at that time. Always have someone watch the scene. On street-based outreach, there are some potentially bad actors to look out for, and this is a partial list. It could be anything. You know, you never know when like a wild bear might just be running through the neighborhood or something. The totally unexpected problem. So always keep your eye out for anything that is unexpected, like the crazy bears. But there might be hostile management around sometimes who are keeping an eye on people. So kind of get an idea, keep an eye on them and see how they feel about you. And if they start to look angry or hostile, that's a good time to get out of the situation. Any potentially hostile clients. Are there any anti-sex worker organizations that are going out? Those can be potentially hostile. You don't necessarily want to have a confrontation, especially not a confrontation while you're out doing outreach. If you do see people who are harassing sex workers, whether they're from trying to criminalize it or trying to get people to move out of the neighborhood, document them, try to identify where they're coming from, and then follow up with them later. Don't do it in the moment. That's it's much better to have a conversation later. Some neighbors, business owners, or residents might potentially be a bad actor or might be a little bit hostile, so it's always a good idea to watch for them. Sometimes there are outreach teams that are really territorial about their space and will try to insist that they like have a certain turf that you don't. Again, that's a conversation to have later when you're not conducting outreach. But again, you want to look for who they are, what organization they're with, what they looked like, and then you're going to have a meeting about that, and then you might contact them later to talk about what happened. And police might be bad actors. This is highly contextual. It's based off of what any given neighborhood is like. When I first started doing outreach in Santa Cruz, we had very, very, very hostile police. And a few years after I left the city, they actually completely shut down the program that I was with. So we were part of a long process to try to dismantle what we were doing. So we had things like we had buckets of needles, of discarded needles that we collected. And we did have police who would grab our buckets of used needles and break them apart and scatter needles all over the ground. They would turn headlights on us. They had all kinds of things they were doing to harass us. In other instances, the police might actually be very happy to see you out there. And when you're conducting outreach, it's also a good time to like be friendly and try to have the best possible encounter that you can. If the police seem to be welcoming your presence there, shake their hands, give them a business card, let them know how often you intend to be there and that you are providing resources. You don't have to paint their toenails or get to know them, but it's always a good thing if they're happy to see harm reduction workers out there. So that's a good relationship to maintain. You don't have to enhance it, you don't have to develop it, but it is good to shake a hand and let them know that you'll be out there routinely. So it varies. Supplies. What kind of supplies do people hand out? The first thing to do is find out what's already in your target area. If there are some really active needle exchanges that are really good at getting supplies out, there might not be any need for harm reduction supplies, and it's just going to be a bunch of heavy stuff for you to carry around that no one really wants to access. If there are public health clinics who are already just like throwing out thousands of condoms every night, you might not necessarily need to bring out the condoms. So find out what resources are already available in that environment that are readily available, and find out what isn't and where you can go in. That said, some of the really common things that people hand out on outreach include condoms and lube, candy, any kinds of harm reduction supplies. It might be bottled water, Band-Aids, or like some basic, really simple first aid kind of supplies, whether that's for blisters or a skinned knee. You don't have to ever provide first aid unless you're a medic. But sometimes someone just wants a Band-Aid. And so it can be really handy to just have a Band-Aid handy that you can pass off. Wet wipes, mouthwash, gum, hand sanitizer, hand warmers when it gets to be cold. Those hand warmers are great in a bra or in a glove or something like that. They're a lifesaver when it's really cold. Bad date lists, snacks like granola bars, lists of local resources that people might want on hand. If you have any zines or newsletters that you'd like to distribute. A really key thing to remember is that if you're doing outreach to street-based workers, they are working. They don't have necessarily like a lot of room to carry stuff. So everything you hand out should be pretty small or easy to use instantly and discard. You might also want to partner with an existing street team that's going out. If you find out there's an outreach team that goes out regularly and they hand out some supplies, you might suggest that you can partner with them and offer a different supply. Maybe you just have your bad date lists and another outreach team comes out with condoms and lube and something else. That way, together, jointly, you have a really comprehensive set of resources, but you don't have to take on the budget issues of buying this other supplies, and you've developed a new partnership. And how do you get these supplies? Aside from funding issues, a lot of supplies you can get for free if you start to be creative. A lot of public health clinics, if you let them know that you're going to be doing street-based outreach to sex workers, will give you tons of condoms. You might not have to pay for that at all. It's worth asking around and finding out. Food banks might be supportive and have some snacks or water that you can hand out. Some churches buy a lot of supplies and might be really, really supportive, and they might provide stuff. Needle exchanges might have some satellite program supplies or funding set aside, and they might give you a bunch of what you need. I know of one outreach team that was handing out Ghirardelli chocolate that they got because someone lived in a really, really fancy apartment building that gave out free Ghirardelli chocolate. And I'm not endorsing theft by any means, but this individual noticed that they always had like tons and tons of bags of these little disposable Ghirardelli chocolates. So they kind of like once a month would liberate a box of the for free Ghirardelli chocolates. And that's something that they had. And that was a creative way to find something. So who knows, if you have boxes of chocolate in the lobby of your building, that might be a great way to have something to hand out. So look at what you have access to. If there's a way for you to not have to pay for something that doesn't cause any troubles and is not theft, because I'm not endorsing theft, try to do that. It'll save you money. And how do you make contact with someone? I think this is where people get kind of shy and where it's hard. You can do all the meeting, you can do all the research and all the reconnaissance work, but how do you actually walk up to somebody and offer them something? And what you need to remember is that when you're out doing street-based outreach, you are in someone's home and in their workplace. So conduct yourselves accordingly. You don't own the street at this time. You're going into someone else's space. So be very, very respectful. If people don't want to talk to you, don't push it. Don't force it. That's not necessarily what we're about. But a simple greeting will actually get you a long way. If you are walking through the street and you have like a good outreach bag, or you have a shirt or a baseball cap or a patch and you say outreach, that might be enough for people to know what that means. Sometimes it can be helpful to say, condoms and lube. In one bit of outreach that I did, there was a very hostile church group that was going out, and they were really like going out in big groups of 12 people, and they were really cornering people and trying to force them into prayer circles that they didn't want to be in. And this was a form of harassment. But as such, everyone in that area was really, really like not interested in talking to you if you were approaching them on the street. And the only way that we could connect was actually by announcing, "We're not the church." And as soon as we said that, people would stop and we could say, "We're outreach, we have supplies." So find out what works. And really remember that people have had negative outreach encounters. Be really, really patient. If someone's mean, if they tell you to fuck off, remember and go back to that empathy and know that they're dealing with people who may not be as respectful as you are, and they don't know who you are until you have been consistent and recognizable and trustworthy. So be patient, be flexible, and let them get to know that if it's a Tuesday night and you have your, your green backpack or whatever that is, that you're probably not that hostile group. And that really is the rapport and your relationship to the community. Develop contacts when you go out and relationships and utilize them. If you've gotten 100 no's in one night, but you've heard a yes from someone who said, actually, I do need some condoms and lube, talk to them, get to know their name, and let them know, say, hey, spread the word. We're going to be back here next week. We really want people to know that we're a resource. Word of mouth is a great thing for outreach. That's part of becoming a trustworthy figure. So find that one person, and that first person who says yes to you is a big success. And if you develop a good relationship with them, they're very likely to encourage some other people to come and talk to you too. So those are great contacts to develop. And know that it might be slow until you're established and trusted where you're going. It might be that your first month, you don't talk to that many people. When you come to your second month, you're getting more. By your third month, you get regular traffic, and 6 months down the line, you have people who are like criticizing you when you show up too late, and that's the best place to be. You want them to know you're going to be there, and you have to be consistent for that to happen. And sharing your work. Documentation is a very, very big part of outreach. It's what helps make it successful. So when you go out, how many hours did you spend working on and developing your outreach program? How many hours did you spend conducting outreach? How many people did you talk to that night? What supplies did you give out? Document all of that. That is all fantastic information. And the more you document, the more you're going to get to know what you should document. Share some of your findings. If you're doing outreach, absolutely let us know at SWOP-USA. We love to hear that you're doing that. Share it within your internal network. If you go to neighborhood community meetings and they're talking about the problem of sex workers in the community, you're going to be able to stand up and say, hi, I'm with this organization, and we have been conducting street-based outreach with sex workers in this area. We have gone out this many times. We hand out these supplies. These are the concerns of the people that we're talking to. Having those numbers are going to arm you with a lot of credibility and a lot of legitimacy, especially since so many statistics about sex work are fabricated. It's hard to get to the truth, and I think we're the ones who can document that. When you quantify your work, it'll make it a lot easier to apply for grants and other funding streams. You can point to something that you're doing regularly, and you can point to something concrete that you need to buy. So having those numbers will make it a lot easier for you to get more money and to help develop your organization. Chart your progress over time. Let people see that you started talking to just a few people, and maybe you only started out doing condoms and lube, but 6 months down the line, you added more goods or services. Chart that, show how you have grown. That's always a really, really cool thing to see. And whenever you're sharing your work, absolutely maintain the confidentiality and privacy of the people you're speaking to. Don't go out and take pictures of people. Don't take pictures of people's workspace. If you're going to take pictures, pictures of supplies are great. Pictures of your team organizing supplies. Those are great photos to share. But don't share the names of the people that you're meeting, and don't share their faces. That's really definitely unethical. All right, and so now I would love to show you guys some of the outreach supplies that I carry out in my outreach bag, and take some of the questions.
Yay! Thank you so much. And I just want to say you are the best presenter in the world for being able to power through 45 minutes without a second presenter or questions. So thank you so much, Maggie. I'm going to ask some questions that were pre-submitted, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Great.
I'm going to come on to the screen.
Yeah, so one question is from someone who's conducted a lot of outreach, but not specifically with the sex worker community, and she's finding conducting outreach with sex workers really challenging, and is, doesn't see a great way to do it safely and respectfully. Also, there's a big issue of anti-trafficking organizations being really predominant in the areas where she would be doing outreach, and thus, people she's reaching out to have sort of certain associations of what outreach workers are before they come out. So, do you have any advice to someone who is sort of worried about the challenges of getting started, from scratch with starting an outreach program with sex workers?
Yeah, people do have a lot of negative experiences with certain harm reduction, or not harm reduction, with anti-trafficking groups. And it can be really discouraging to get started. And that's something that I've definitely faced, like, again, going out on outreach nights where I've had to announce, like, I'm not with that organization. And one of the best things that you can do is get to watch how they interact. Find out what they're doing, find out what they're wearing, and do anything that you can to physically distinguish yourselves from them. And also, if there's a lot of harassment that's going on, it's also a chance to potentially send them a brief, informative, friendly but firm a message that people are feeling threatened by their actions. And that you've witnessed some of them, and that the community respectfully asks that they discontinue what they're doing. Even if that's ignored, that's a great form of outreach that can come from watching people. I also think that doing counter actions is a really great way to do outreach. And I think this is especially key in places that are encouraging people to write down license plate numbers. I found a great little sheet on how to talk about sex worker presences in your community. And you can make a small little zine, and anywhere that you've seen one of these anti-trafficking campaigns, it might be helpful to just leave a little leaflet with people or talk to community members to let them know how to be respectful of the sex workers in their community, and talk about their concerns with them, and actually negotiate these issues as people sharing space rather than adversaries. People are only seeing a lot of negative things, especially from the anti-trafficking campaign. They build a lot of fear and uncertainty and distrust with sex workers, and you can help build trust with the sex worker community if you find where those areas are and you leave them a little note that lets them know how to be respectful and how to explain concerns, or perhaps request that someone move down a little bit. The difference can be saying, hey, I've got a young child and I have to get up for work in the morning, and I know you're here working tonight, but I would really love it if you could please move down a little bit because we're having difficulty sleeping. Or we've noticed some trash left over. We would really appreciate it if you could tidy up before you leave. Letting people know that that's an option. People forget that. They forget that sex workers are humans. So if you're able to come to a different area in the daytime and leave that kind of information, that is a great form of outreach. Or even if you're doing something like printing out some basic tips, that say, sex workers are a part of this community. If you have concerns, here are some ways that you can respectfully talk to them, and put them up on telephone poles, or put them places where you might see other types of anti-trafficking propaganda. You don't always have to go out and do direct service type of work. You can find other things that are needed. And if people in that area see that there's someone who's providing a counter opinion, that might help establish trust, especially if you include who you are on the bottom of that poster. So you can start out with just a visual campaign and then reevaluate and see what goes on after you've been doing that for a while.
Awesome, thank you. And then this is a slightly unrelated question, but I want to make sure it gets in. Do you have any tips on reaching out to student groups, as well as like what students can do to reach out to sex workers or to support sex workers?
Yeah, student groups are really hooked up into so many different forms of outreach. And the only thing that I think I might want to preface is this for students, sex workers, students finding other student sex workers, or students who are also sex workers who are interested in their community. But I would say a lot of the information would remain the same. Students have a great opportunity to connect with a lot of programs that might already be on campus or connected to campus. My outreach work started when I was a student. It was when I was a volunteer, and it's when I was doing HIV testing, and then that got me networked into the community, and that was my direct entry into that. But I do think that one thing that students can do is to talk to other students and to utilize a lot of media to provide counter narratives, letting people know that there are anti-sex worker campaigns that are happening in a community and how they can respond to that, letting people know that they can show up to city council meetings. But if you're a student, that shouldn't necessarily hold you back. If you have the capacity, the funding, and the time to go out and do outreach, you can form your own organization and do it. Or you can find someone else on campus who might be doing that. Find a sympathetic professor who's a little bit familiar with it and ask them if they have any ideas about what's good in their community. But really, people like to get students hooked into their projects in general. So if there's a harm reduction center in your town, if there's a pre-existing program, walk down, shake hands, find out what they need, and see if you can fulfill that.
Awesome. And then the second question is for students who aren't sex workers, right? I've noticed that a lot of universities have, coalition against trafficking in women chapters springing up, and a lot of anti-trafficking discourse. So if there's students who are allies and, are like, hey, I want to promote sex worker rights, what are some things that student allies could do to help with existing harm reduction organizations or to make their campuses a safer space for sex workers or whatever?
Yeah. One thing that you can definitely do is do a lot of writing. If you're able to write an editorial, especially in a campus paper, that's a great way to get the word out. Sometimes people just need to see two opinions back to back. And if you see people that are being very vocal, find out where they're being vocal and meet them there. A lot of times I consider people who have these opinions or these narratives to also be so much in need of outreach because they're disconnected from the truth. They're disconnected from another narrative, and they've never had access to someone who can present these ideas differently. So if they're writing things in your campus newspaper, you can write things in your campus newspaper. If there are flyers that are going around, you can make quarter sheet flyers as well. If you have a campus health center or an LGBT center, that's a great place to scan and see if they have any resources for sex workers already. And they might not. If you go to the health center and you say, hi, what resources do you have for students who are sex workers? And they look at you with like that kind of a face, you have a great opportunity right there to make sure that there are some resources in place. That might take researching and finding out what your community already has to offer, or finding out what type of clinics or harm reduction programs there are that are familiar with sex worker issues, and make sure that your campus knows about them. Make sure that the mental health counselors on your campus are familiar with it. Research, find a speaker, find someone who's local and invite them to the campus. Invite them to come do a training with the counseling team, or with your health center, or with your women's center, or the LGBT center. That's another great way is student groups. You guys can access a lot of funding and you can bring people to your campus. So find someone whose voice is really resonating with you and bring them there. Make your own resource guides and hand them out, especially at a new student orientation. The fall orientations are a great time to slip in a zine or to slip in a resource list. So find those opportunities when people are speaking and be a voice there.
Awesome. And then I have one quick related question. So there's a sex worker in an area who has a lot of allies who are interested in helping her out and supporting her local chapter. But she's wary about what is the role of allies in helping out with outreach for a sex worker-led project. When it's, so basically what role do allies have in starting an outreach project, and what should this person with sex worker experience do in sort of figuring that out and finding that balance?
Mm-hmm. It really kind of depends on what that ally is. One thing that I have allies do all the time is I like to do kit packing parties with people, and that's where I need to get all of my outreach supplies organized. I might need to put them in little baggies. For example, this is one of my outreach kits, and this one is for crack pipes, and so I have to have in a little pipe cover. I have a multivitamin pack, and my multivitamin pack has a sticker that is on it. I have some of these little alcohol wipes. I have an antibiotic ointment. I have a burn cream, and I have a pipe, and I have a chapstick, and I have Brillo, which is for the filter. And it takes time to organize all of this. It takes a lot of time and effort, and it's a big mess to roll Brillo. I love having my allies pack my kits. That is a great time. You can put them in a room. You can pass a hat around and have them like chip in a few bucks, maybe more. Get some food, get some music, and talk about what's happening in your community. Make your allies pack your kits. That can be quite a chore. If you're going out on outreach, it kind of depends on what skills or resources they have. If this is an ally who's from like the local needle exchange or harm reduction center, they're coming in with a different set of skills, and you might not necessarily like have to explain things to them or hold their hand as much. If it's someone who's just a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed ally who doesn't really know much about how to approach people, they might not be the person you want to take out on outreach, but they might be the kind of person who's really helpful with other like ancillary tasks or support tasks. They might also be a great person to have if you're going to a city council meeting, like have them be a body standing with you, but not necessarily speaking. There's power in numbers. And if you're going to a neighborhood council meeting and you have a bunch of people who are complaining about the sex worker presence, and they're saying there needs to be more police and we need to have more enforcement in a given area, your ally doesn't have to speak. They can stand behind you. And the fact that they are standing behind you is going to lend you a lot of credibility and legitimacy. So have them be a body there. Have them donate, have them write editorials, have them help hand out leaflets, especially with a lot of these John license plate campaigns. They might be a really good person to talk to a neighbor and say like, hi, we know that your neighborhood has had a lot of concerns about the activity here. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about ways that you can respectfully communicate your needs if you have any problems, or who to talk to. They might be good at talking to those folks. But as far as peer-based outreach, I really think it is important to have a common characteristic or a really supportive training program to get people into the loop. But if you're already volunteering and you're doing this in your community, it takes work. It's work and it's time, and it's actually a profession to teach people how to be harm reduction workers. And if you're out doing outreach and you're teaching people how to do outreach, that's a lot to take on. I would say find other support tasks and have those folks be a good megaphone for the work that you're doing. Let them know what you're up to. Let them know how many people you've spoken to, and tell them to let people know like, hey, this local organization has been doing really impressive outreach. I love hearing about it. They've been seeing more and more people every month. You should know about it too, or maybe donate. But also, kit packing, make them pack your kits.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that my mom's best friend, who is a staunch Catholic, has done for SWOP Chicago's outreach in the past was bake cookies. So like there's always things you can do without putting at times slightly clueless people in direct contact with vulnerable populations.
Yeah, slightly clueless people will make they will make your outreach harder, but they are good at baking cookies. Or they might also be great at inviting you somewhere to talk to a group of people. If they're really enthusiastic about your mission, sit there and say, wow, you seem really into this. Do you think your friends or any of your organizations might be interested in hearing about it too? Is it possible you could invite me to your bridge game or your book club? Help them help bring you in and amplify your voice and amplify your work. But if they're out there doing outreach with you, you might be cleaning up their messes, and it might hold you back.
Awesome. And then different question, but a really good one. So do you have any tips for approaching workers when their managers are nearby without compromising them? Or are there any things that people should think about when doing outreach to strolls where, people are working with management? And
Yeah,
then maybe
that's
later talk a little bit about outreach to something like a massage parlor or a strip club.
When you're out with a street-based worker and there's management, sometimes they have any number of concerns, and it's really highly contextual. If people are getting aggressive, that might be a situation to just disengage and leave. If they're curious, it might be a good time to just let them know that you've got condoms and lube. And a lot of times people are familiar with outreach. And if you let them know that you're not here to, um, you know, cause any trouble for them, that you're just there providing support resources, letting them know that and bringing them into the loop might be helpful. So I've had times where management has been really happy to see me. I've had times where management was really hostile, and the best thing to do was just disengage and find a different time and day, and be aware of who they were and what they were driving, and find out from other people if this has been kind of a pattern or a repeat incident. But oftentimes, a lot of areas are, they might have positive experience with outreach workers. They might have negative experiences. You might be a new thing or an old thing. So that's really going to depend on where you are. As far as going into other settings, again, it's highly variable. Because of harassment, there are lots of places like massage parlors or clubs that just won't admit anyone in with anything printed. Other places are much more accommodating if you let them know that what you're providing, give them copies of the information that you're providing. But talk to the manager. If they're overseeing a location, if they don't let you in, you're not coming in. So you do have to sometimes quiet some of your opinions and work on negotiating what's going to work with them, and saying, we really want to make sure that everyone has a safe and happy and healthy time tonight, and we have some resources that might be helpful. Would you like to see them? These are things that we can come provide to people. We aren't here to take any of your time. We're not here to recruit you into our cult or to our faith or to anything else. We're just here to provide some of these resources, and let them see how they go with that. Some people might let you in. The Cupcake Girls are allies predominantly. They are not a sex worker-led outreach project, but they are an outreach project, and they tend to focus on going into clubs. And they were able to do so with baked goods and by talking to people and negotiating with managers. So don't be discouraged. If one person tells you no, the next person might say yes, but be very transparent. Let people see what you're providing. Don't sneak anything in. Let them see what's in your bag. Let them see the written materials, and let them kind of overhear what you're saying. A lot of these relationships aren't things that are developed in one day. It might just be a quick, brief encounter the first time. But if you keep showing up every week and people know that they can see you and you're a dependable person who comes by, the interaction that you have 3 months down the line might be radically different. And you might get to know a lot more and have a closer relationship. So sometimes that this is a long game. This is a long game, and someone's might just tell you, fuck off the first time, and a year down the line, you're giving each other hugs, and you know each other, and you know each other's life stories. So play the long game. Start simple and build your way up. If you just come in and you say, we're a local sex worker rights org, and we have some yummy snacks that we would love to share with people, start there. We have condoms, we have lube, and then eventually work on to more resources or more printed materials. But what I have found with managers at a lot of indoor locations is that they're a little bit more skeptical of printed materials. You want to make sure that they know that and they're good with that, whereas other supplies they're much happier with. They might also say, we'll give those out for you. And you might have to be willing to decide, is that going to be okay with you or not? If you show up and you knock on the door and you want to hand out resources and they say, well, we'll take those resources and give them out for you, you don't know if they're ever going to get handed out. They might wind up in the dumpster, or they might actually be distributed. That's your call to make based off of your gut and your knowledge of it. And maybe it gets dumpstered one week and the next week it gets thrown into a closet, and the week after that it actually gets handed out. maybe it doesn't. That's something you're going to have to really look at your gut for. But be patient, be willing to come back, and be willing to listen to people if they say no.
Awesome, thank you. And then, another thing for indoor workers, if there are, if you're not handing out, I think a good example of print materials that managers of strip clubs are going to be really hostile to are like a strict delineation of like independent contractor labor rights and the lawyer you can call to file a suit against your club, right? But if you're just handing out things like condoms, safer, like resource literature and stuff like that, that's not obviously hostile to management. If there are some people that or contacts who are working there who can then talk to their management and be like, hey, these people are actually really cool, blah, blah, blah. Someone who's already in that environment can be really helpful. And then for street-based outreach, I think being willing to give your materials to anyone, including to management. I know that was something that was mentioned in a HIPS training, the idea that, you can give a bag of condoms to someone that you're assuming is a manager. Or, the Chicago Recovery Alliance will literally give out these, 500 box crates of needles to people who are probably selling them to people or who maybe are selling drugs as well. So positioning yourself as non-hostile to management is really important too. Maybe something like that.
Yeah, even though you might be concerned, it is being non-hostile to management will help you establish a relationship, playing on the personal relationships that you have and the people that you have on the inside definitely matter. And remembering that when you do outreach, it's voluntary and it's freely given and freely accepted. So when we do peer-based outreach, we don't have an agenda. We don't have anything, a predetermined outcome for where those supplies go. You have to really get to a place of detachment with that and know that you've allocated these resources, that you're putting them out into the community, and you've given them to somebody, and it's in their domain, and it's their decision to know what to do with them or not do with them. So that's something kind of personal that you have to do in your own head, is to remember it is all voluntary and it is all freely given, and you've already allocated it for the community. Just make sure that you budget so you have enough to provide to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, the final question that we have is, someone wrote us and said, when I reach out to fellow sex workers, they don't respond due to paranoia or competition or infighting. Do you have any suggestions or tips on how to deal with those elements, the infighting within communities, paranoia?
Yeah. Oh, infighting is so hard, and that's not a problem that's like something that you can resolve once and will be done. These types of conflicts are things that we're always working on, and we're always having better relationships with the people that we're working with. But one thing that you can do is to reevaluate your goals and see if you can meet your peers where they are first before you go out and conduct outreach. So you might want to consider different forms of outreach that people can agree on. Maybe you're not able to go out into the community this year, but maybe you're able to get people together to share a bottle of wine and write some postcards to people. And that's a good place to start, because then you can point to something that you did successfully accomplish. And then you can do something new as these relationships get better. If people are afraid of going out into the community, there's a lot of good reasons why they might be. And no one should be going out and doing this until they're really ready and they feel really comfortable with it. But negotiate, find out what you might be able to do together. Maybe people get together and decide we're always going to go to the city council meetings. We're going to get dinner first. We're going to talk, and it's going to be a social thing. And then we all sit in the back and we watch the city council. And then we meet up together later on to decide if anything was relevant. Start there and count your victories and count your successes, because when you start to get people who have fun working together, who are starting to resolve issues and can also point to things that you have successfully done, it will help you take on bigger goals in the future. And will help more people want to join you. You know, if you're always the crew that's at the neighborhood meeting and you guys look like you're close and having a good time, more people might want to join you or might want to find out what you're about, and you haven't even gotten up to say anything in front of the council yet. You were just there, and you were there regularly. So find out what you can do and start there.
Then I got one follow-up question to the last question about management. So SWOP Chicago is conducting a needs assessment and is looking at utilizing outreach to recruit participants. So do you have any advice on how to incorporate, advertising or promoting a needs assessment survey into the casual conversation SWOP Chicago is already having with people they do outreach with, without intimidating people or turning people off?
Oh, if you already have a relationship, that can be a lot easier to introduce things. If people already kind of know you and they know that you give supplies, then you can let them know that you are tailoring your program, that you want to more precisely identify what people want. So you can preface with that and then hand them a survey. And then also reiterate the fact that their privacy is going to be respected, that they are under no obligation to participate in that survey, letting people know that they have a choice and that if they say no, you're still going to give them whatever they want out of your bag. And that's not going to change how you feel about them. That's a great way to do it. People like to have choices and options, and people like to know that there is no obligation when they access you. So that's really going to be about the attitude that you present it with. Starting with people that you've already built a little bit of rapport with. If it's a complete cold call, it can be really hard to get someone to participate in a survey. If it's someone who's seen you a few times, you can ask, say, hey, it's good to see you again. We have our usual supplies. What can I get you tonight? Do you have a moment? Right now, we want to make sure that we're able to provide the best possible resources and help this community know what you guys want or need. Would you be willing or able to participate in a brief survey? We're going to make sure that you're not identified and that your privacy is absolutely maintained. If you don't feel like doing that tonight, no problem. Here's what you have. I'm really looking forward to seeing you again. How's your night tonight? That makes a big difference. Giving people the right to refuse and not judging them for it, or not making their access to supplies threatened if they say no, I think is the key to doing surveys. And you kind of gauge people as you get to know them over time. Some people, you can know are going to be more willing to engage with your survey because they're really excited for an opportunity to let you know what they want or what they want from the community. And you might know some people who aren't. And as soon as you find someone who is like a really good taker, work from there, because they're going to know other people who might be more willing to be a taker. Also, sometimes it depends on if you have another good environment. I know out in San Francisco, in the city, we have one night a month that's ladies' night. And it is a group of different organizations who meet up in a particular location. It might be a church basement or another pretty accessible place in the neighborhood. And a handful of organizations all show up at once, all offering different types of services, from a meal to a movie playing to haircuts or clothing or basic healthcare. And because people are hanging out there a little bit longer, it can be easier to access them for a survey because they're sitting down for a minute. Whereas if someone's in the middle of working, if a good client comes up, they're going to go work. They're not going to finish your survey, and they shouldn't. They're out there doing business. So it can be hard if it's a really, really busy night. So if you give people advance warning and say, hey, we're really interested in conducting a needs-based survey. We're going to be coming out with that next week. We hope some people will be able to talk with us a little bit more. We just wanted to let you know that this will be coming up next week. Advance notice lets people know, and that way they don't feel sprung on it, and you're also not hitting them with it right away that time. They have notice. They might be able to get some more people who'd be interested. So those are some of my tips for that. Doing surveys is tricky. Collecting demographic information is tricky. Grants sometimes want really specific information that just feels very inappropriate to be asking out on the street with somebody. So when I do demographic information, I usually do the best that I can with what I know about people. And as we get to know each other, I can get some more information. But I tend to not ask too many questions until I have a pre-established rapport or a sense of comfort.
Awesome. So that is basically all of the questions we've got so far, unless anyone wants to ask a last minute one. Are there any more goodies you want to show us, or any last minute thoughts
I was gonna say,
or advice you want to give?
So this is my standard outreach bag. and it was a pretty cheap one. There's a lot, and one of the things that I like about it is it has a big cross on it, but like a red cross, so it's a medic bag, technically speaking. I think it's a paramedic bag. It's got lots of pockets in it, and so I have all my different supplies. And when I go out, I tend to have a bunch of paper resources. In this case, I have a bunch of dental care options for free or low-income dental stuff. I have all the like local food pantries, things like that. But whenever I give out resources, I make sure that someone has asked for a resource first. A big way to turn people off is to throw a bunch of resources in their face. It's too much information. It's unwanted information. Usually people, you want to keep it to like 3 resources or less. Not too many. No one's going to remember it. So be really, really cautious with the resources that you offer. Make sure that you're not just throwing it on someone, and wait for them to ask for it first. If they say, hey, you know, I've been trying to find a dentist. Do you know any in the area? And you've got your resources ready. That's a great time to offer it. If someone smiles at you and says, how are you doing tonight? And you say, hey, would you like some dental resources? It looks like you just made a really big assumption or a judgment on them. It feels kind of weird and out of place. Let the person you talk to really steer the conversation. Let them let you know what you want. Don't just start kind of throwing things at them too much. And I have some other little goodies. Like I always have blister Band-Aids. That's one that I think a lot of people forget. If you're walking in heels all night, that can get to be kind of painful, as we all know. Sometimes I keep, not a lot, not necessarily for full distribution, but for people who might need it, I keep some little ice packs. This way, if someone happens to need it, I can just, you know, get it set up for them and hand it to them. But I don't really expect that I'm going to run into too many people who are going to need an ice pack, but someone might. Yeah, condoms, lube, all kinds. Like this is stuff I was able to get for free from a public health clinic. They like gave me a box of condoms and lube, and I think they'd give me as much as I wanted. Come up with a project that's close to your heart. I started doing crack pipes because not many people in my city or my country were doing this, and it became a cause that I got really passionate about. And I care about so many other forms, but because I know that this is a really uncommon resource, it's the one that I've thrown a lot of my attention and energy towards. And you might find what that is for you. And if you find something that you really notice is a gap in your community, something that no one else is providing, and you have a creative idea on how to get a hold of that and get it out into the community, do that, because that's where you're going to find a lot of your energy and success. That's the passion that you need to do outreach.
Awesome. Thank you so, so much, Maggie. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this great webinar. So the reason why it was disorganized at the beginning is because it looked like there were technical difficulties and it didn't start. So fingers crossed this will be available on YouTube afterwards. Fingers crossed really hard. But all that link will be sent out to all of you. And again, thank you for joining us, and good luck with your outreach.
Thank you all so much for watching. I'm so glad you're all out there. And everything that you're doing really matters. And outreach is a big concept, and chances are you're already doing it. You just need to learn how to write it down and give yourself credit for the work you're already doing.
Awesome. Great. So I think it's stopped streaming, but I'm going to just hang up because it might be publicly streaming still. So because this was a sort of funky, there was like a warning message. Anyways, I'll email you, Maggie, to finish up rather than having a debrief convo right here that everyone can watch, if that ends up being the case. But anyways, take care.